we sort of knew where we were going to go. We were going to intercut with the complicated, all of the issues that we could cover and intercut that with the kids. But I will say, even though it was harder to
describe the challenges of public education than to
describe the challenges of public education, because that animation we have all the buildings grow up and everybody had their best intentions, and so this board was formed and the school board was formed and this was formed and that was formed, and then everything became like this Gordian knot that just could not be untangled. So in that sense it was harder, but on the other hand it was more optimistic because we saw what a good teacher did with one kid in 1 year's time. And you could make more progress with education reform and quality teachers in a couple of years' time than you can with global warming, which is international and even more players involved.
The film tells a powerful story, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, moving film. And I find myself, I admit it's not my first screening, literally crying at the end, which I'm prone to do in movies, but this one really, really does for me. I think the point, Elizabeth, is that for many, many decades now, we have acknowledged the depth of the problem in public education. You go back really to A Nation at Risk and even before. And so there has not been a failure of observation, of intent, of money, of focus, and so on. But there has been an absolute failure of execution. And I believe that is largely because, and I think this is effectively captured in the film, almost all of the work in education reform has taken place within a certain set of assumptions about how the system ought to operate. And the problem is the assumptions. And so all the programmatic interventions, a better reading program, better math program, lower class size, pick your poison, it's not that they're unhelpful or not positive, it's that they only tackle the very sort of margins of the problem. And until you attack the structure itself, not much will happen. If your question is that changing? I mean, have we actually started to do that? I think the answer is yes. I think that, as this film reflects, the conversation has changed really dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years, in no small part because of the work of Jason and Michelle in DC, and perhaps even some of the things that we were trying to do and are trying to do in New York. If I would point to just one thing in the film that I just want to stress, and that is that our mantra in the New York City, I was Deputy Chancellor of the New York City Public School System, was we do not care how a school came into existence, whether it's a public charter school, whether it's a traditional school. That is an adult issue. There are lots of successes, not enough, that are happening within traditional public schools. And the film focuses, I think spectacularly, but rather exclusively on charter schools as being the sort of epicenter of success. And thank goodness for those charter schools, because they prove that this is possible and they indeed are successful. But we shouldn't care, we shouldn't build a system around one kind of school versus another. All we should care about is whether a school is working, and if it's not, we should deal with it in one way or another.
So you're saying that it's okay if I took a hidden camera and...
Also see, look, when I took the job 4 years ago, there were 80,000 teachers in the New York City public school system. 55,000 of them were tenured. The day I took the job, 3 out of 55,000 teachers have been terminated for incompetence in the prior 2 years. Actually, it was 7 out of 55,000. There is no career on earth where whatever that fraction is, 7 over 55,000 reflects the level of, and it's not that I'm picking on teachers, I'm just saying that is an unnaturally low number.
Dean, is it really that tough?
Yeah. So just one brief sort of coda to the film. We actually now have a teacher's contract. We negotiated a contract with the teachers union and actually have made massive changes to tenure, and so things are hopefully going to be a lot different in Washington, D.C. going forward. So I think that's important for everybody to know. But yeah, it's back. There are far too many schools in DC and in New York and across the country where I would not send my own son Ezra. And as long as one of them exists, we've totally failed as a country. And I think the point that I would stress most about this movie is, and it was made towards the end, is this problem, it's so sort of massive, but if you sort of come away with one thing, it's that it's a great teacher that can change this. It doesn't matter where the kids come from, or what background, or what language they speak from, or what zip code, it doesn't matter. Having an outstanding teacher can radically change educational outcomes for kids. And so that's why the work that I do is to make sure that we have an outstanding teacher in every classroom. And to set up the policies, what Chancellor Rhee always talks about, get the adult stuff right so that we can make sure we have great teachers in front of every kid. Meaning, if you're not doing a good job, you can't be in front of our kids. You don't have the privilege to teach our kids. If you are doing a good job, we got to make you rich. Because it's the hardest work in the world. And I say this as someone who did it for 8 years. To be an effective teacher in a challenging school, extraordinarily difficult, but totally possible to be successful. So we have to make these people who are doing it well just, wealthy beyond their imagination. That's something we're trying to do in DC.
How wealthy will they be when they come?
Yeah.
How do I sign up?
So anybody who wants to teach in DC, come talk to me afterwards. Yeah, we're going to try to pay the teachers who are doing the best job in the highest need situations over $130,000 a year.
No matter how many years you've been a teacher?
So we care far less about how long you've been a teacher and far more about how well you're doing. Some of the best teachers in our school system have been teaching for 30 years, and some have been teaching for 3 years. Frankly, I don't really care. I just want to know, are you teaching my son?
So I just federal stimulus.
Right. And county higher education as well. An important program that went in place was something called Race to the Top, which was a competitive program for states to bid, to agree to radical changes in how they were going to approach education in their state. And they would be eligible for awards of about $4.5 billion. And in the course of that competition, 10 states went in and changed their laws, mainly about teachers, putting in place evaluations. We didn't have evaluations in this country for teachers. That's actually another tremendous reform that Jason is leading the country on. Maybe he'll talk about his evaluation, the DC evaluation system that he was responsible for designing.
I'm sorry, no evaluation?
No, we haven't evaluated teachers in this country. We have a workforce system that paid teachers based on years of service and graduate school credentials. Good teachers and bad teachers were paid the same with increases in years of experience and going to get graduate school credits, which were often subsidized by school systems. So money went into paying teachers to go to graduate school. We know from research that getting a graduate school degree has virtually zero effect on teacher effectiveness, maybe with the exception of science, but certainly not in elementary schools.
Right.
So talk about wasted money that needs to be redirected. So we weren't evaluating teachers. We weren't, in many instances, paying them much extra to take on extra responsibilities like being master teacher and mentor teachers, to work with new teachers, to take on work in shortage areas, to go to more challenging schools, to pay bonuses if they were getting great results with their kids. None of that we were doing. So a dialogue started about changing the compensation system for teachers, but then all of a sudden people began to realize, and there were some reports that made it clear, we have to evaluate teachers if we're going to make decisions about whether they're effective with kids. And then you look, oh, we don't have evaluation systems. Principals maybe make a 5 or 10 minute pass through to a teacher's classroom every year.
Was that true for you and your teacher? You never evaluated? Tell me to
They just changed the name on the form. So they would have all the comments and they just changed the teacher's name. So it was literally like the same evaluation.
Wait, sorry, they had it all filled out and then
Yeah.
it just.
Yeah, so in DC, 95% of the teachers are rated meeting or exceeding expectation.
Today?
No, previous.
Yesterday.
Right? So in a school system where less than 20% of the kids actually read or do math on grade level, 95% of the teachers are just outstanding.
And that's like,
That's a national,
Absolutely.
right.
There's a wonderful thing that anyone that's interested in the field should read called I think it's called the
Widget
widget effect. And it basically makes the point that teachers, we've institutionalized the idea that teachers are interchangeable units. We've made the performance irrelevant. I'll forget the statistic, you'll know it, but it's something like 97% of teachers, 98% of teachers under the system are rated in this binary system as satisfactory versus unsatisfactory. And it's, by the way, important to sort of get behind why that is, because it's not like people wake up every day going, I know what we'll do, we'll build a system that hurts kids. I've actually never met anybody that really wakes up every day. But there is there's a lot, mostly has to do with politics and so on, but there's a fundamental thing that happened unconsciously in this country, really with the advent of the union movement in the 60s and 70s. And it basically comes down to this: who bears the risk of error? I hate to be lawyerly about this, but what do I mean by that? There are always, what do I mean? Teachers asked for these rules because they were the object in many instances of racism, of gender discrimination, of arbitrary action by principals, of nepotism, I'll protect my cousin and not you, and so on. So they basically asked for and received a system that said, we're going to take the discretion of the bosses out of this, and we're going to pay everybody the same, nobody's going to get fired, everybody's going to get tenure, everybody's going to be deemed satisfactory. So the exchange for that is to protect the teachers from the risk of arbitrary personnel actions. We make the children bear the risk of poor teaching. We say we will tolerate a child losing a year of learning from which he or she will never recover in order to assure that there are no arbitrary personnel actions. It was a value choice that led to the system that we have today.
poor teaching is an error.
I bet Jason's reading to his 11-month-old child now, probably started in the womb. But if you're an undereducated parent, you're not able to help your children in that way, although we saw an example in the film of a parent who was working with kids and with her kids, but they weren't making any progress in school.
I'll jump. I agree with Chris that I think that this film did a really, really good job of shining a light on some of the great successes that we're seeing in our systems by focusing on charter schools and focusing on the great work of charter schools. I think that the education reform space at large is a very complicated space, and so kudos to Leslie for trying to really boil down the issues into a way that's going to make it understandable to sort of general population. But I think that each one of the charter movement I think struggles in lots of ways as well, and I think that there's lots of pieces in terms of the 80,000 teachers that live in the New York City public school system, right? If I think about what charters have done, is they've brought the best of the best of the best teachers, and they've poured tons of resources into mentoring them, into coaching them, into looking for those teachers to be incredibly high performers before they even became part of the charter networks to begin with. And to the extent that we have, so many, 3 million teachers in our public school systems across the country that we're going to have to hire, to the extent that we're building the capacity of those people, and to the extent that we're building the capacity of those people to do great jobs in a realistic way, i.e., a lot of those charters are asking teachers to work 15 or 16-hour school days because they're working with kids from 7 a.m. until 5 p.m. when the kids go to school, and then from 5 p.m. until
whatever time they're lesson planning, calling parents, doing the call board. And not to say
The
that
kids
that's
are
not
like prep, they said.
and they don't feel like school is interesting, and they can't make the connections to why school is going to be important and those skills are going to be important to the rest of their lives. And to the extent that we can bring in a Google engineer and they can teach kids what the Pythagorean theorem looks like in real life and how you can use it to design a video game, and your video game characters don't crash into each other on a screen that you've created, and you've taken that traditional math concept that you learned about at 10 o'clock in the morning, and at 4:30 in the afternoon you can apply it. That's what you can do with a longer learning day. And so it's a reimagination of a school day, both in terms of the time, the shifts of educators that we have, and also how everyday citizens can play a role in contributing to that learning process.
Books
Low
and
class size.
low class size, yeah, you name it. It just doesn't matter if you don't have a good teacher. I know the holding line of quality in really being excellent. Excellence draws excellence, and that's how you get scalability. And I totally reject this notion that there aren't enough people in America to do this. There are certainly 3 million outstanding Americans who can staff our classrooms and make this movie, a thing of the past. We'll look at it like those Superman cartoons and say, "Oh, it's so antiquated. Our students don't learn."
My goal is always to become
Yes.
obsolete.
So I'll play moderator for a second, and just say, like, to Jason's point of, I also firmly believe that there are 3 million high quality, awesome people out there that will serve our kids well. And we need to cultural shift that the profession is sexy and exciting and desirable, and that people really want it. And both Jason and I come from the Teach for America world, so to the extent that has become sexy, like, I think that is a cultural shift. But to the extent that Doug Lemov and a lot of people out there who have been working with teachers, a lot of people go into schools, I think, really firmly saying, like, I do want to serve kids really well, and I want to be great, and I want my kids to be great. I think to Chris's point, you just don't have a lot of teachers being like, gosh, I'm really here because I want to fail kids.
Right.
And so to the extent like that, we need to be, as a profession, teaching teachers how to be great teachers. I'm curious about what our systems are being able to do, because that's a big piece of this work too. So do you want to comment?
You're not allowed to ask them So I was simply saying, simply dangling incentives for greatness is not enough. We actually need a theory of what greatness looks like, and almost a handbook or an R&D department to figure out what works. So I think that's my question.
So that they can't get the extra help they need. And we do this throughout the country. And most of the public does not understand that. If you're going to have teachers work longer days, if you're going to give bonuses for teachers in high poverty schools that do great jobs, if you're going to have master and mentor teachers in there, you've got to have money available to pay for that. And when you're putting more of your money in the schools with kids who bring less challenges to school, you start those kids and their teachers and principals with an arm tied behind.
So it's not just
Steps, we can talk for hours about what those steps are, but what we've done is at our website, which is waitingforsuperman.com, something is going up about every 3 weeks, and you can go to the website and there are 2 big buttons, and you can pick fix the system, and you go in that system and you say, I don't even know who my local school board member is. How can I not know who this person is? So you go, that leads you down one path. And it says, you can go to a section, how is my local school doing? Even if you don't have kids in that local school, I can't continue to drive by that school. I need to find out what they need help with. And then there's another section that says help a school, and it's more detailed about those schools and whether you want to volunteer, mentor, and help. Now, these things alone are not going to change the system. But let me be really clear. Superman, the metaphor for Superman in the film, isn't one principal or one teacher or any of us. It's you. It's supposed to be you. You are the ones through citizen action that can change the system. Because I feel we do now know what works. We can talk about how scalable it is, how quickly we can do it, but I think that there's about 5 things that we have at the end of the film. We need real accountability. We need need more classroom time. We need great teachers and great principals. You can't just have great teachers and not have great leaders, great chancellors, great superintendents, and great principals. And we need world-class standards, because we can have these little pockets of success, but we need to not be 21st in science and 25th in math.
Right.
And one last thing, and I'll
Yeah.
stop talking, but these pockets of success, there are 88 PIP schools. Jeffrey Canada has 8,000 kids in his schools. These aren't little offshoots. Jeffrey Canada's third graders are, does anyone know how proficient, have you heard about Harlem Children's Zone? How proficient are the third graders in math? If someone can just take a guess. It's a high number.
Ninth grade.
No, how proficient are the third graders in math? Like what percentage?
Like 80% or something like that?
Yeah.
Is it like 80%?
It's 100%. 100% of the third graders are proficient in math. You go 8 blocks away down to Harlem Success Academy, a different charter school, a different group. Their third graders are 100% proficient in math. So it can be done. And one last thing, we are not just a pro-charter film. Now, the metaphor for following these kids around based on this article was, it is so absurd that when I have 28 types of peanut butter that I can choose from, not even counting the organic brands, that I don't have all of these great schools to choose from, you know, for my kids or for your kids or for everybody's kids. So that was the metaphor. But what we're saying is the successful schools right now are working slightly outside the system, and the ones within the system are coming up with new contracts and new reforms that allow them to create this change.
Disturbing statistic that I run into over and over and over again is that most Americans believe that their child's school is just fine. They may think that there are problems in the system at large or in general, and most, I mean, let's be very, very honest about this. Zip code is destiny when it comes to public education, and that, you know, in a country that is premised on this fundamental idea of equality of opportunity, where education is meant to be the sort of agency of giving everybody an equal chance of prospering or not based on their own individual merits and so on, it is basically a falsehood, a joke, if you happen to be born non-white or a child of an immigrant in urban America. And the very cynical conclusion I have reached is that we tolerate this because overwhelmingly we don't care enough to change it. And that's because everybody up here, and I'm going to guess everybody out there, one way or the other will figure out what to do with their kid. Whether it's a private school, whether it's moving to the suburbs, whether it's just
Homeschooling?
Could be, whether it's like just being an incredible pain in the neck advocate for your kid in your own school. And once you get your own child or nieces or nephews or whatever it is worked out, then it becomes someone else's problem, and that someone else tends to be poor and black or Latino or whatever. And we would, if the achievement gap were reversed, let's just wave our magic wand, okay, and go that the facts are that an African American 12th grader is performing in reading or math at about the same level as a white 8th grader in this country. That's a national aggregate statistic. Imagine if that were flipped.
Yeah.
Okay, we would have a Manhattan Project. We would have a put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. I'm dating myself a little bit.
A race to the top, for instance.
Well, but we mean it.
Yeah,
Right?
I want to hear from other people just before we say.
Yeah, so let me
Is
just,
anything else missing?
the biggest missing thing is a grassroots movement. I've worked my entire professional life in Washington DC, and I'm involved.
Beautiful city.
What? Beautiful city, right. And I'm working to try to get the kinds of changes Jason and everyone else wants here into federal law. And actually this administration has been more aggressive on these kinds of ideas around teacher effectiveness, around turning around low-performing schools than anything we've ever seen before. And now we're getting this huge pushback from who? The adults. And it's not just, it's not the teachers' unions alone. We have to understand that hundreds of thousands of people employed in our millions employed in our public school systems, and they want to slow down this change. And we need grassroots voices of parents of these kids, yes, but we need others whose kids are grown, just as Chris was saying, or who have grandchildren. Look, we're all interdependent. I always use the example when people like me get even older than I am now, and our bodies start falling apart, and we're going to call on a medical system that is going, the profession, the medical profession, all the technicians and everything, it's going to be a workforce of color. And they're going to be the folks that come out of, that have often gotten the worst education in this country. I'll have the money to get care, but will there be people trained to provide care for me and others? We are all interconnected. And until there's a feeling in this country that we have a stake in the education of today's school children, I fear for being able to put in place, I work at the policy level, putting in place policies that will result in the school level stuff. Jason's
So I can tell you the very quick answer. I got it all figured out.
Silver bullet?
This is it. We just need,
Drum roll?
we just need, the federal government will take New York City or DC, right? Let's take DC. Pass 3 laws. This will fix it forever, okay? Number 1, if you got kids and you live in DC, you can't leave DC. Number 2, you gotta send them to a public school. You can't send them to a private school. You can't homeschool them. And number 3 is the kicker. We're gonna randomly assign your kids to a school in DC. How long would it take for all this to get fixed? 10 minutes? Like, those of you who has kids out in the audience, right? Are you a little bit nervous now? I know it's funny, but like that's the sense of like, oh my God, and concern and outrage that you feel in your gut that I think Chris is talking about and Cindy's talking about. That's what we all need to feel about every child in the country, right?
Anyone have a question?